All right, here we go.
Okay, let's do this.
This is live.
Live?
Well, it's not live.
Okay, Smith, make us laugh as always.
No. Well, the thing is, I can't put something in front of your face like I normally do.
Is that what you do?
Yeah,
Smith, I'll just do this.
I put a tab in front.
Alt-tab, Etok's face.
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar with me, James Smith.
Me, Neil Brock.
And me, James Etok.
It's a movie podcast.
We can do characters that fly and shoot laser beams and do woo.
Beneath all of that, it's all about friendship.
Playing the drums until his hands are bleeding.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each head off and watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone, then waffle about it for your listening pleasure.
Furthermore, if you want to join in and suggest a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and review. It really helps getting the pod out there. For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar.
I think you need to turn off Etok's camera already.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Off Radar Series 2. I'm James Smith. I am joined by James Etok.
Hello.
And Neil Brock,
Hello.
who we call Nige. And you might notice the sound is very slightly different today, and there is a reason for that. And that is because we are all sat in the same room again.
Dun dun dun.
For the first time since we recorded our top 5 80s films. So go back and listen to that.
But yeah, this is the first time we've done this, since 2020 in the same room?
Oh, I was going to say it was the first time since the 1980s, but I think you're probably more accurate by saying it was there.
So yeah, we have. Well, what we've done, we've decided to come back. We've got together, but not only that, not only we're recording, we actually watched the film together today. We went downstairs to Etok's little cinema room.
That sounds like I own it. I don't. I live in a building that has a private cinema, which is proper lush when it works.
It was really nice.
We got it working. We sat there in comfort.
Yeah, it took 20 minutes, and it's now
Which wasn't comfortable.
Nearly 10 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. So there you go. Anyway, yeah, I also should say, those of you that are tuning in to listen to First Blood, this is not First Blood, but that is coming soon. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 1990 version, and that is the film we've literally just watched and turned off, and now we are going to talk about.
And it's just as violent as First Blood, perhaps.
And that's the other thing. Etok is editing this episode for the first time. Someone else is editing it.
So this might be the only time you hear my voice throughout this entire podcast.
It might be the only time where you hear either of our voices.
Yeah, it's the
Etok show. Yeah.
It was funny today. I went and got my hair cut. So
wait, this better not be the end of the story.
No, it's not the end. And she was like, "Oh, what are you doing today?" I was like, "Well, I'm going to a mate's house, and we're going to watch a film. He's got a cinema room downstairs that he doesn't own." And she was like, "Oh, what film are you going to watch?" And I was like,
Did you lie?
No.
You should have done.
I said, "Oh, we're going to watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles." And I was sitting next to like this old 80-year-old man, and he like looked around as if to say, "What the fuck?" And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then I was like, "Am I going to explain the podcast?" I was like, "No." So yeah, the rest of the haircut was
That was the end of the conversation, wasn't it?
If there was a judgment call on her part, forget it, because we're the only judgment that matters right now is ours.
Well, that's right, and that is the point of this podcast. We're going to talk about this film, and we're going to review Teenage Mutant Ninja
And again,
Turtles.
like Smith said, we've literally just watched it, like maybe 20 minutes ago. The end credits rolled. We were singing along to Turtle Power, Turtle Power, and having a right old time of it. Nige was dancing.
That's true.
Still am on the inside.
If only it was a visual
Just
thing.
in his pants, it was quite the sight.
And I guess before we get into the film, it's worth stating that, I don't know about you guys, for me, like, Turtles was, it was massive in our childhood. I remember being at school and kind of everybody getting into Turtles. We had like Turtle kind of t-shirts, and the merch, and the cartoon obviously came after the comic, but the cartoon was so huge. And, you know, like in my friendship group, Like me and my friend Steve, we always wanted to be Donatello. Like you have to pick who you wanted to be at school.
That's interesting.
And Donatello was always the one I went
Yeah,
for.
it was my favourite as well, just because I don't know whether it was something about the colour purple or the fact he was slightly perceived, at least in the cartoon, as slightly smarter than the rest of them as well. And he had a really cool like kendo stick. But yeah, I remember it from, was it on like Live and Kicking or like
So, as someone who watched it frequently, it was on BBC One, and then eventually it went on to Going Live, and then Live and Kicking. So it worked its way around the listings, but primarily it was shown on BBC One and Children's BBC in the afternoons. That was where I first saw it when it debuted.
Well, no, I was just going to say as well, from my side, like we watched it at school, and I was a fan. I think I was more kind of like a Transformers kid than a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kid, or Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, as I'm sure Etok will tell you all about quite shortly. But it was always good, but it was one of those cartoons I watched and thought, yeah, this is all right. But I always thought that maybe I wished a better cartoon was on. So maybe I wasn't the biggest fan. In all honesty.
So for me, like every Saturday morning, like me and my sister bring the duvets down. I don't know why we did this as kids. I don't know if you did it. You bring your duvets down from upstairs, and Saturday morning TV, when Saturday morning TV used to exist,
when it was Saturday morning
and
TV.
you used to watch like 5 hours straight from like 6 a.m. Of cartoons, and Turtles was always one of those that kind of fell into that period. So it kind of grew from there, and then obviously like you kind of play it at school. We played it. Like fighting at school, and then me and my sister also just played it in the house. I was still Donatello. She was always Leonardo, interestingly. So yeah, what did you do? Were you?
I'll tell you, like I was a comic collector, obviously, and I was big into animation back then. Anyway, you may not know this, but actually, I like the show He-Man. And
what?
I know, I may have never mentioned that before. He-Mort, Human, and the Masters of the Universe. No, obviously, like Nige, I went into Transformers and then Real Ghostbusters, and then literally the last thing, and it would have been almost like a year or two later, I wouldn't have watched it. But Hero Turtles debuted, and I'd already seen the comic in comic shops, but it was the Eastman and Laird original. It was like very dark, and these 4 turtles. The artwork, it was an independent comic, so it was always quite a weird. It didn't appeal to me. I was like, huh. And the first time I remember, so I'd seen the comic just on shelves, and the first time I remember hearing about the cartoon, I was in Canada in August of '89. Went to see Batman over there, by the way. Saw a bunch of films, my dad, over in Canada as well, as having a holiday.
Grossing film of the 80s, Batman as well.
Batman '89, Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that in a future episode.
Yeah.
Actually, we almost definitely will. But I remember we were queuing up to go to like Niagara Falls, and my dad's friend's son who was there at one point just went, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I was like, what's that? And I remember just him singing it to himself. And I was like, oh. And then I went into the toy stores and I saw them. I was like, huh. And then literally a couple months later, come back to the UK, the cartoon debuts. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And even though I knew there was a title change, I wasn't aware of like all the editing that had been done. Because obviously Hero Turtles, they butchered the intro. Any sequences with Michelangelo's nunchucks were removed. Any utterance of the word ninja was removed. It's fascinating when you break it down. But it was literally the last cartoon that grabbed me. Because obviously I'd say it was the last great... Actually, tell a lie. I was going to say it was the last great big cartoon or toy that appealed. But I'd add Power Rangers to that. Power Rangers was the thing that dethroned Ninja Turtles a couple of years later. But
yeah,
for the most part, Ninja Turtles was the last thing, the last toy line I collected. But yeah, I was big into it. And when this movie was announced, it was at the... Like, it's hard to explain to anybody who didn't grow up at that time how big Turtles was, whether it be Hero Turtles or Ninja Turtles. When that movie was announced, we were like, oh my God. And you were just clamoring to see the first images. And then when the first images came out, you were blown away. It was just seeing, wait a minute, they look like the Turtles. It was mind-bending to see that stuff.
Well, it was bizarre as well when you sort of talk about the fact that obviously there was this cartoon and then the film came afterwards. At one point, whilst they were discussing making this film, they considered the Who Framed Roger Rabbit style of actually having the cartoons interacting with live action. Yeah. And then eventually they sort of decided that just wasn't going to work. Because obviously, at least in Roger Rabbit, kind of the theory was there. It was because you were in a cartoon world, whilst in the Turtle one, it wouldn't have really made any sense.
No, because you see them interacting with humans in the cartoon anyway. Why would they suddenly be interacting in the real world, as it were?
Exactly, yeah. So that's when they brought in Jim Henson. And to be honest, I'd completely forgotten that they had any involvement in this film until we watched it today. And I was really surprised, but sort of as we sort of talk more about the film, sort of move away from us talking about like the origins of Ninja Turtles, it was really surprising that they would be involved in that kind of thing.
Well, that is the first thing that is glaringly obvious with this film when you look at the poster, but then you start watching it, is that it's no CGI, it's no kind of animation, it is blokes dressed up in costumes. And, you know, that's the charm of it. And that is kind of what was sold to us as kids. And then
also at the time, that was like what they did. I mean, I don't know what the budget was for this movie, but what they were doing was state-of-the-art animatronics. You know, obviously Jim Henson.
It's something we discussed sort of as we were watching it. It was an independent film. And it only cost $13.5 million, which at that time wasn't that much. It wasn't a studio-backed film. It was something that they'd kind of pitch around to the studios, and a lot of them turned their noses up at them. I think like Paramount especially were sort of heavily pitched to turn it down, and I think they ended up making the more recent
They
ones.
made the Michael Bay produced ones.
Exactly.
Weird,
Yeah. So it kind of almost came full circle. But we were saying as well, it was the highest grossing independent film until the Blair Witch Project came out. Whenever that was in sort of the early noughties. Was it 99?
99, yeah. I just started work at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport.
Oh.
But yeah, $13.5 million. Like,
what did it gross? Do you have that information to hand, Nige?
Well, it's funny you should say that. Well, if I pull up my old little Google thing, $202 million.
Bloody hell, that's a profit.
So it did an absolutely insane profit.
We're talking in 1990 as well.
And especially when you see all the product placement in the film and the sponsorship and all the merch that probably came off the back of it.
Well, funny you say that as well. Like when we were watching it, we really noticed heavily. Like someone had like a Burger King Whopper, and it was almost like they held it in front of the camera. But there's another scene as well when the Turtles order a pizza, surprise, surprise, and the Domino's pizza delivery guy shows up. But it was actually Pizza Hut that ended up sponsoring the film for like $20 million, even though they're not even featured in it, because obviously there was such an association at the time between pizza and obviously Ninja and Turtles.
The Turtles license must have been, you were guaranteed whatever you made, whether it be like a book or a movie tie, like a tie-in deal with the movie, you were guaranteed to make money, because kids would walk into the cinema, see the film and be like, I want to go to Burger King. Like that stuff did work, especially with this movie. Bloody hell.
Awesome! Righteous! Bossa Nova! What? Yeah? Bossa Nova? Chevy Nova? Oh. Excellent! Come on, let's...
And talking about the film, so maybe for someone who needs a little bit of a refresher, who hasn't seen it before, you suggested this film for us to watch, I believe.
Oh yeah, I probably did, didn't I? Yeah, it would make sense.
Almost certainly.
I've kind of put this. Maybe just give us like a very brief synopsis of.
No, I don't do brief, James. But, I'll try.
Yeah, okay, as brief as you can do.
So the story closely follows, I would say, the comic book, which is another part to talk about this at some point. New York City is. I could just recite the lyrics to the Turtle Power song if you want, by Partners in Crime, but
just
this is like going back to Convoy again. You're just going to sing us the tune.
So. The New York is under like this crime wave, and it's this unseen hand or foot, as the case may be. And it's this band of, it's so weird, isn't it? They're like a band of ninjas, but they're like street punks and stuff, I guess, from parentless families or unloved.
Down and out. Kind of unloved kids.
How does Shredder define it? He's kind of like the people who have been forgotten by society or something like that, at least.
And so Shredder, who's a ninja from Japan, who's decided, you know what, I want to take over New York City, and
as you do,
kind of thing, as you do, you know. He creates this like this underground army of ninjas, and they go around terrorizing New York, but in their ways stands for Ninja Turtles, as you do. But yeah, basically it all connects to April O'Neil, who's a reporter who's reporting on this, is attacked. She's saved by Ninja Turtle. She eventually meets the Ninja Turtles, their Master Splinter. Master Splinter and the Shredder, Uruku Saki, have a history, a bizarre history, involving a lot of puppetry, which is cute and awesome. And basically the big fight takes place in New York. Splinter is abducted at one point. The Turtles have to get him back. They retreat away to find themselves. Raphael's been hurt, but they come back to New York and they fight the Shredder. And guess what? They win. But then Shredder turns up in the next film. Oh, I've jumped ahead. I've jumped ahead.
Yeah, let's not
Spoiler.
go down the next film. Yeah,
And
come
then in
on.
the third one,
It's a strange film, but it kind of works in terms of it just kind of brings...
good v bad. Like the messaging is fairly simple, isn't it?
And it gives a huge platform for these kind of really popular characters to kind of do what they do best, I suppose, which is like martial arts, which is, again, it's the kind of thing where you think people attacking each other with nunchucks and swords, not necessarily the sort of thing you would think would be this huge attraction for kids. But for whatever reason, during this period in the 90s, everyone loved it. And Etok said earlier in terms of like he went from Turtles to kind of Power Rangers. And it's funny he said that because, again, both very kind of martial arts heavy. And I guess knowing Etok as well as I do, that kind of progressed into like fans of Jackie Chan films. There's a big sort of love of like Jackie Chan and Jet Li during like the late 90s. And I think a lot of that came from people who grew up on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Really, yeah, like around the time Turtles came out, or let's say when Turtles was at its peak, my friend kind of introduced Jackie Chan movies from the 80s, which also were produced by Golden Harvest, who produced this film. So there's all this connection. So I remember we would just worship like Jackie Chan films. We went into the whole Bruce Lee thing. Now, I personally never got into Jet Li, but Nige said, even though I didn't really hint at it, Power Rangers followed Ninja Turtles, and I didn't collect anything, but I did watch the first 2 seasons because what Nige said, I was obsessed with martial arts. I loved it. It was like the amount of martial arts in those first 2 seasons of Power Rangers was like, this is so cool. And then it became like, well, I mean, it was Power Rangers. I'd say Ninja Turtles had a bit more of a grasp in terms of it wasn't just Power Rangers. Power Rangers was very simple. Ninja Turtles at least had depth and story because it was created by obviously 2 guys who were comic book artists who had a love of Frank Miller comics and X-Men. You know, I know we're going off a bit of a tangent here, but the reason they're called the Foot, if I remember rightly, is that in Frank Miller's Daredevil comics, the superhero Daredevil's enemy were the Hand, which were like this group of ninjas from Japan. So when they did the Ninja Turtles comic, it was almost a parody. Let's call them the Foot.
I was going to come on to say, like, for those of you who've listened to a lot of our podcasts in the past, you might have realised we've kind of skipped over something. We normally introduce the director, introduce the stars of the film. Yeah. We've not really done that this time, and that's really because there's not really someone you would kind of look at their name on a piece of paper and be like, oh yeah,
really,
it's them from this.
Yeah.
It's really a film that kind of stands up on its own merits in terms of the characters are... April O'Neil is April O'Neil. She's played by someone called Judith Hoag, who you may have seen in like The Odd Random Thing, TV show, film, but she's not really, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, a household name. The guy who plays...
Casey Jones.
Casey Jones, as I almost called him, David James. He is a guy played by Elias Koteas, and he's kind of one of these character actors. You might recognise his face, and you might recognise him from a few random films. But again, it's not someone that's kind of... that sort of jumps out at you as like this big star. And I think part of the reason why that's the case is because the stars of this film are like giant green animatronic Jim Henson Turtles.
It's such a good point because, you know, most films that we watch and we talk about, you know, like, well, any of the films that you pick out, like, all right, let's look at Talented Mr. Ripley. You know, you've got Jude Law and Matt Damon like in starring roles. In this film, like, it's all about the comic book characters, and it's basically taking that and putting it into this. It's almost like a cartoon live action. Well, it is a cartoon live action. So what that means is it doesn't really matter who's voicing it. You could have had Brad Pitt voicing the role of Donatello, but it wouldn't add anything.
The most famous actor in it, I would say, would be Corey Feldman. Corey Feldman is like, at the time, Corey Feldman was still Corey Feldman, and yet he was just in this to do a voice of Donatello. And probably the next most famous actor, who wasn't even famous at the time, is Sam Rockwell.
And yeah, he was probably a no one because he was just a street kid, right?
Yeah.
He's Street Thug 1 or Street Leader 1 or something. He's not got even a character name. That's sort of how small he was. And sort of Etok saying about Corey Feldman being in it, he was basically only in it because he got paid $1,500, which obviously for anyone in kind of the acting industry will know that is absolutely nothing. He thought this was going to be a straight to VHS sort of quick job done kind of thing, and he didn't realise it'd be as big as it was. I think at that stage of his career, he'd obviously done all the Lost Boys stuff, but his stardom was kind of starting to wane a little bit. And again, it was just a paycheck. So I don't think he ever assumed it'd be the success it was. And as we said earlier, the fact it was an independent film as well, you would very much think that. And I was looking at the director as well, a guy called Steve Barron, and it's again, haven't heard of him. He's done mainly music videos, but one of the other films, he also directed Coneheads with Dan Aykroyd, which was like the Saturday Night Live spin-off. The only other film I can find of note on his like record was Mike Bassett about like the England manager, and it's such a... You wouldn't think in a million years that the same director directed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's absolutely bizarre to see that.
He also directed the Durrells.
That's a TV show,
which is a TV show. Yeah.
Am I right in thinking he's British, Steve Barron?
He actually was a camera assistant for Richard Donner's Superman. So
he must be British.
He's Irish, yeah. And he was also the camera assistant on Richard Attenborough's A Bridge Too Far. So he obviously had high caliber. Again, did all these music videos for acts in the 80s like Madonna, ZZ Top, Aha, even a bit of David Bowie. But his actual credentials, why they decided that this music video director would be perfect for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, if you go back to the Halle Berry Catwoman, they hired a music video director for that, and it was an absolute car crash. Yeah. So this film, in terms of the directorial style, you can tell it's a little bit cheap, but it actually kind of flows together okay.
Well, I think visually, I think it's a really strong film. They really kind of, especially from the opening frame, I'm always a fan of films that really set the mood for New York, and I think this film did it with its like rainy streets and it's dirty in places. It's very much a New York of the 80s, late 80s. But yeah, I thought the cinematography and everything throughout was like really consistent. There was no bits where I thought, oh, there was that one camera shot where we were looking at the bit of paper, remember? And I turned to you and I was like, oh, because it kind of did this weird turn that kind of induced some sort of...
It was a swoop over the phone, wasn't it?
It was just like, I feel a bit nauseous watching this scene. But yeah, for the most part, I thought visually and I thought it was a really good film.
Well, as well as that, it's quite interesting that even the writers, the screenwriters of the film, hadn't really done anything else. As Etox said, a lot of it's based on like the original comics. But what I actually found quite interesting was the fact that, certainly in the first half especially, it actually flows really well in terms of like the comedy between the Turtles. There's a lot of contemporary references of the time, like a Rocky film and stuff like that. And it's actually quite funny. And again, it kind of appeals beyond that level of like a, 8 or 9 year old who's watching it just because they love turtles. Yeah. There is something there for a kind of an older person sort of watching the film and thinking, you know what, this isn't just something that's on in the background for my kid to enjoy. It's something you can actually sit down and think, you know what, it's not half bad in terms of there's that little bit of spark. And yeah, sometimes it loses its way a little bit, I would say, but the dialogue isn't as bad as you would expect it to be, especially considering it was released, over 30 years ago now.
We fought well. Mm-hmm.
Were you seen? Mm-mm. In this, you must never lapse. Even those who would be our allies would not understand. Our domain is the shadow. Stray from it reluctantly, for when you do, you must strike hard and fade away without a trace.
I think that brings up a good point, because the easiest thing they could have done, because the biggest thing about Ninja Turtles in 1990 was the cartoon. It would have been so easy for them just to do the cartoon on the big screen. I don't mean an animation. I mean have those characters, have the bright, vibrant colours. What this film does so perfectly is it takes its comic book origins very seriously, and it brings in the cartoon elements like the multicoloured bandanas. Obviously in the cartoon you had the origin where Hamato Yoshi becomes Splinter. In this one, it's not the case. It's Hamato Yoshi was Splinter's owner, because Splinter was just a rat that learned martial arts, as one does, as a rat does. But I do love the fact that this movie looks to its comic book roots. It doesn't ignore it, because I think it knows that it's got a good foundation, because it was an incredibly well-selling comic book, the original black and white Ninja Turtles. So they've obviously looked at that, gone, let's take those personalities from the cartoon, because that's the other thing. In the comic book, personalities weren't really defined. Raphael was like your loner, Leonardo was the leader, Michelangelo wasn't a party dude, Donatello wasn't good with machines. This, I think, creates a nice middle ground. Like Donatello in this, we don't see him really good with machines, like building crazy stuff. Leonardo isn't an assertive leader in a way, but there is moments, and Raphael is the broody one, Michelangelo is fun. So I think they create a wonderful balance between the cartoon and the thing. And I think that's why you can watch it as an adult and think, oh, this is pretty cool. Whereas And don't get me wrong, the cartoon still stands up, but some of those seasons, it's just like, oh, that's a bit, the turtles are in like turtles at the Earth's core. They're meeting dinosaurs.
Well, yeah, it's interesting what they've done with the characters in this because, I mean, as I said, as a kid watching the cartoon, Donatello was like clearly my favourite.
Donatello does machines.
But when you look at this film, like he actually comes across like him and Michelangelo seem to hang out a bit, like quite a lot. They're a bit klutzy. Like Michelangelo's always the idiot. He always just wants pizza, dude. Yeah. And like no one wanted to be Michelangelo at school. Like just because did you want to be Michelangelo?
Well, me and my mates, because we loved nunchucks, we were obsessed.
Well, the nunchucks are cool, but
I've got a pair of nunchucks still in my cupboard. Like okay.
Well, some people wanted to be Michelangelo at school,
but nobody liked those people.
but in this film, what's interesting is Michelangelo and Donatello have this weird kind of bromanship.
Yeah, broski. Yeah.
And then Raphael and Leonardo, who are, I would say, slightly more straight characters in the film.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Seem to be, Raphael almost does seem to be a bit more of a leader, whereas in the cartoon, Leonardo was always like, he was the leader.
Well, just very quickly, the problem with Leonardo is he's got swords, and this is a PG. It's not like he can slice people in half. I always feel like that handicapped him in the sense of there's only a very limited amount you could do with him. Whilst I guess the prongs, whatever you would call
size.
That Raphael has, kind of gave him a bit more to kind of be the focal point. But yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, no, and I, it's just interesting how they've kind of created, like you said about these characters within that foursome, they've all got defined characters, but also they've also got these little kind of pair-offs that they do, like not just like people do, but kids do. And they're probably kind of looking into, like, maybe they're not, maybe it's just a coincidence, but as kids, like, you do that when you're with your group of friends. You definitely have your best mates and stuff. And let's not forget, this is aimed at kids. Like you say, like, people, like older people will watch this, especially at that time in the 90s, and enjoy it. But this was a film that followed a massive, massive cartoon, especially. And, kids went to see this. When I went to see this, like, I didn't watch it at the cinema, but I remember watching it a couple of years later with some friends. All four of us got round. We all had our pizzas. Characters, we had our pizzas, and to be fair, we did have pizzas tonight before watching the film. Well, me and Nige.
We had
I
to.
didn't even think of that. You two totally. I had sushi because I was Master Splinter.
Exactly.
Very nice.
God.
You got the Japanese
Do you know
link.
what? We didn't even realise that. That's nuts.
Well, like you saying about, like, it's a film for kids, absolutely, but it's almost as if we may be looking into this too far, but the Raphael, Leonardo were almost like for slightly older kids, like the young teenagers that will watch it. Whilst the Michelangelo, Donatello is just for like the juvenile, silly kids, like just like whatever. And you kind of have that nice little balance.
I do love that scene when they're in the apartment and Raphael and Leonardo having that falling out, and you get Michelangelo and Donatello go, fight, kitchen.
So what do we do now? What do you mean, what do we do now? Splinter's out there somewhere. I know Splinter's out there. Fight? Kitchen? Yeah. So what are we gonna do about it? What can we do about it? April's our only link to these guys. We have to wait until she comes up with something. Oh, so that's the plan from our great leader, huh? Just sit here on our butts.
Because it's that, you get that interaction, and you see that in that moment. It's like, these guys have seen all this before. They're just going to go over here and eat a pork rind or two, and it's, but yeah, that's a really good point you bring up about those kind of little relationships. And you even get like, because the scene in the sewer where they're waiting for the pizza, that's Donatello and Michelangelo as well. Like, pizza dude's got 30 seconds or whatever.
And they like lament a pizza basically being so old that it's gone a bit skanky, and they're like, "Oh no!"
Yeah, and that's the two of them again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there is those little like team, well, like almost like teammates within the larger group. So it's quite interesting.
And we mentioned Splinter, and one of the first words I said to you guys was like, I kind of remembered him being this big kind of like powerful thing, but when you first meet Splinter in this film, he's very small and. I mean, he's a rat.
Well, especially compared to the turtles, who are, let's face it, they're absolutely
big and muscular ripped. Turtles, which sounds really weird, but that's what they are. So when you see Splinter, he's basically the polar opposite. He's almost like an old man.
Well, that was his thing, isn't it? He's supposed to be like a
wise old
master,
So you get that contrast towards the Turtles, but you also get that contrast between him and Shredder, who is obviously the baddie and like got kind of like vicious kind of claws, like blades.
Let's be honest, when I was a kid, like Shredder was the coolest in terms of like the
Terrifying.
style, the design of his like outfit, the metal mask, like you said, the kind of spikes or hooks or whatever you want, claws coming off of his outfit. He was cool. Like Shredder was cool, but he was also terrifying.
And the fact you can't see him, it's almost got that kind of Darth Vader-ish,
definitely.
kind of.
He's got a big long cloak as well.
Yeah, it makes him more mysterious.
Yeah, if we're talking about the cartoon, it always used to bother me because I was like that kid at school that we loved Turtles, BBC One in the afternoon watching Turtles. And I remember when I went into school one day and said to my friends, "Do you know Shredder?" And they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "I think it's Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince." They're like, "No, it isn't." I was like, "I think it's Uncle Phil," and obviously it turned out to be
James Avery.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like when I made that like thing, and then it was eventually like, "Oh my god!" Like James Avery plays, is James Avery on one channel going, "For God's sake, Will," and on the other one he's going, "I'll get those turtles," and he had that great voice. He like sadly passed away, I think back in like 2013 or 2014. But he was such a great voice actor, and the reason I'm bringing up Shredder is in the cartoon he was such a star. Because he was like a 1990s like leader in the same vein as Skeletor or kind of Megatron or Cobra Commander or whatever from all these 80s cartoons. Like very iconic, very visually strong, like you guys said. Great voice, great kind of command of the screen or Shredder's on screen. I think this is where the movie fails me. Is Shredder is... They go back to the comic book roots. If you've ever read that first issue, spoiler alert, in the first issue of the Ninja Turtles comic, the black and white one, the first one Eastman and Laird ever published, he turns up. By the end of the comic, he's dead. He turns up, he says a few words, they fight him, they beat him up, they win, he dies. Then you don't get Shredder. I think Shredder maybe turns up in issue like 4 or 5. Like they have like these beautifully crafted story arcs. There's the funny thing as well. This story takes influence. It just takes its entire, not script, but structure from the like first 4 Ninja Turtles comics. But I just think Shredder, and it's a reflection of those comics. Shredder just isn't very like you see more of Tatsu, his henchman, like doing stuff.
He's not in it a lot, and he's not actually as powerful as he should be. And also, I think you see too much of his face in this. I think if you saw less, it might be. Like the reveal at the end, spoiler, would be more impactful. But you actually see half of his face, and I know.
I think more should have been done with like the shadows. Like when you first see him looking at the screens, that's great. He kind of does that turn to the side. It's like, oh, that's a great visual. But the more you kind of see of him in that sense. But again, it's every time you see him, it's just like, when like even Casey Jones is on screen, you're like, I like this guy, I like this character. He's got screen presence, he's funny, he's commanding, he's a badass. Shredder just kind of turns up, bullies some kids around, and then has a little fight at the end, and then charges at a rat going rah for about half hour.
Yeah,
and it's just like, what? Shredder to me is just
Only effort, discipline, loyalty earn the right to wear the dragon doji. You are here because the outside world rejects you. This is your family. I am your father. I want you all to become full members of the Foot.
And the other character we should talk about is obviously April O'Neil.
Oh, definitely.
Who was, I think in the cartoon she was like, was almost bigger than the Turtles at times.
At times, yeah.
Well, she was like very well known for like obviously that big yellow jumpsuit. But when in the film, the actress who was obviously casting the role, Judith Hogg, like said, "This looks ridiculous. I'm not doing it." So they didn't have it. So the only kind of nods you get to that is when you first see her, she's wearing this like yellow trench coat, raincoat, and that's the only really thing. So they kind of like pulled the character out of what it should have been. And apparently as well, she was kind of a bit of a nightmare to work with whilst they were shooting the film. She wasn't in any of the sequels because she kind of denounced the amount of violence that was in the film and just really didn't get on with the whole concept of it all. And it's a bit of a shame as well, because I remember like as a child, like being in that kind of impressionable age, she was one of the first sort of women on screen where it was kind of like, oh, there's something interesting about this character. And partly because she was such a strong character, but partly because it was like that discovery of like, oh, women, oh, she's nice. And it's the same for the Turtles as well. Like Michelangelo's like infatuated with her. She's like, oh, she's lovely. And all the Turtles almost fall in love with her straight away. And yet she still ends up sort of snogging Casey Jones, which is a bit weird.
It is a bit weird. It's interesting with April O'Neil because at the beginning of this film, I feel like she starts off as a really quite a strong character, like strong lead on screen on the TV. But when the Turtles come into the film, she kind of loses a bit of that.
I'd say it's more when Casey Jones comes into the film. I'd say more
she becomes a bit of a, like I need saving kind of character.
When they go
rather
to the
than
farm,
that strong,
that's where she kind of loses.
where she's like, where she's hiding from like, the footmen, like
footmen.
Footmen.
Well, like it's almost, it sounds like I'm stretching a bit, but there's almost like this big crossover with Star Wars. You've got Shredder, Darth Vader, you've got the Stormtroopers, you've got April O'Neil, Princess Leia, you've got Casey Jones, I guess is kind of sort of Luke Skywalker, Harrison, Han Solo, but again, maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but there just seems to be that little bit of it, and you're absolutely right, about halfway through the film, they kind of don't know what to do with her anymore, so she becomes background, and that's basically it, and I think that's where the film, for me, lost a lot of momentum. Like, there'd been a few fights, and then they just didn't really know what to do with themselves. They thought, oh, we'll send them off to a farm and kind of refresh everything. But there was no kind of sense of urgency. There was no sense of, like, where is this actually going?
Again, like, if interject, that comes straight from the comics, because there was, like, one issue where they're at the farm, and it's all, the narrative is all done from April's diary, which is why she's talking, and, they get the narrative in the film, like her doing the narration and doing the illustration.
It's strange being back on the old farm. Even after all these years, it still feels like home. My amazing new friends have suffered their first real defeat. That's bad enough, but they've also lost the opportunity to find out about their mentor, and I'm sure that hurts them much more than anything else. Each of them deals with this confusion in his own way.
In the comic, it was her writing a diary, and you'd get you had the scene where Donatello and Casey Jones are trading insults while fixing a thing, or Leonardo's waiting on Raphael. This was all from the comic. So I think that works in the form of a comic, like one issue where it's just completely character-based. When you introduce it into the third act of a movie, like Nige says, it's just kind of, the momentum kind of goes, boo! And you're just like, why are we here now? I understand why we're here, but there's not enough to keep us interested in why we're here. Also, the comic had the best insult, which was duck fart, which I thought was a great insult.
One of the other interesting things, I mean, we mentioned it earlier about a lot of the youths in the film that are kind of lost, struggling teens. I think at the time audiences could probably identify with that. Even if you're not necessarily a bad teen, you could probably identify with the fact that you might be cast out a little bit, and that Turtles represent that, as well as the kids of kind of joining Shredder's crew, as a kid, like personally, like you want to be one of the Turtles, but I think there's part of you that can also identify with those kids as well, and you see in this film the kid, kind of hard to explain, the April O'Neil's boss's son. If you're with us,
Danny,
he basically is one of those bad kids, and we see his kind of progression through the film and learning, as we often do in film, to become a better person and of that.
His story isn't really strong enough, is it?
It's
no,
not.
Definitely not.
It's not, and also he looks a bit ginger and weirdly similar to her, and I was a bit confused. Maybe they're
Wait, at first,
they get it on?
So I've seen this film. Like, like I said to you guys, I hadn't seen this film in years. But when I first saw him, I was like, "Oh, that's her younger brother or something."
Yeah,
I forgot it was completely
well,
like.
that's what I thought. I thought it was a son for a minute.
Well, yeah, again,
doesn't
like
have
ginger hair and stuff, and it's like they seem to have this close relationship when they kind of meet first. Well, the first time you see them meet in the film, but yeah, it's very strange. Like you said, it was almost kind of like, oh, it's something for kind of the youth audience to latch onto, to be like, oh, I can identify as that character.
I can be a goodie if I'm bad. I mean,
One thing about the teens that did make me laugh, I made this observation, and I think you'll agree with me, is that you saw these street punks, and like, Sam Rockwell's there, like, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. All these like black kids, white kids. whenever the Foot were fighting, one, they're all Japanese.
Yeah.
And when they were unmasked, they're all Japanese. When they spoke, they were all Japanese, like with the accent and stuff. And it's just like, where are all these street punks going?
And also, no extra in this film has one line. It's like, only the main characters speak. No extra is allowed to speak. If you see all the kids in the background, they're just like...
I just want to talk about the action scenes in this film because I thought they're really good. I mean, it is a technical achievement when you've got these guys in giant, let's be honest, heavy fucking turtle costumes doing cartwheels, martial arts. I know, I always talk about that nunchuck scene because it's one of my favourite scenes of the movie because it's just brilliant. Like, you having to use nunchucks whilst wearing gloves. Like, I've used nunchucks. I know how to use nunchucks, but you're wearing two giant gloves.
So just describe the nunchuck scene again, Etok.
This is where I play a clip. A fellow chucker, eh? So it's a Foot Clan guy. They attack, the turtles, and he's got his nunchucks, and he does like a little... like he's ready to fight. So now Michelangelo and this Foot Clan soldier have a nunchuck off where they're, just trying to outstyle each other with their nunchucks.
A fellow chucker, eh?
It's almost like a dance.
Well, some of the spin kicks as well, like you were saying, animatronic, these big, heavy suits, they look absolutely perfect. And I think, it was a testament to the fact how well choreographed it all was. But at the same time, it was a lot of the martial arts was almost done a bit tongue-in-cheek. Because again, it's a kid's film. Like, you've got these people fighting with, as you say, nunchucks, which were banned in the UK more or less, and all these other sort of heavy duty weapons. Like at one point they start grabbing some axes and sort of swinging at them, and it just seems like the music and everything, it all seems a little bit out of kilter. It looks great and there's a lot to love about it, but
I would say that's always been Turtles' kind of thing, is like, even if you go to the first 5 episodes of the Ninja Turtles cartoon, for those that are interested, are very different to the series that followed, because those first 5 episodes of the cartoon, you had the foot soldiers were actual guys, so the turtles would fight them and stuff. But there was a lot of weapons like shurikens and bicentos, which are axes and scythes and stuff, and everything was used violently. When the next season came along, as is tradition with a lot of cartoons in the 80s, the foot soldiers were robots suddenly. So you could like rip them in two and do all this stuff to them. You could attack them and the turtles weren't. It was like, parent-teacher groups saying like, it's too violent. So what Nige says is so true is it is a weird thing. But I think at the same time, the other thing, what I liked about the fight scenes were the turtles were fallible. They were getting
they could take the bruises.
That was
definitely
the good thing. It wasn't like these Ninja Turtles who were expert fighters were perfect. They would get punched and it was all comical because I guess in a way what Nigel's heading to is you don't want to see your kids in a cinema don't want to see a turtle like
being beaten to shit.
Even like the Raphael thing is beaten to shit. Even the Raphael thing is done in a certain...
It's like comedic, isn't it? It's like a back and forth between like, oh, what's Raphael up to? I'm sure he's having a great time. It's like, he's having a shit.
That is the thing to remember with this film is, we're not expecting Batman as in like the darkness of Batman.
But it is a lot darker than a standard kids film as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's the style.
But like if you're going to criticize this film, that would be it, wouldn't it? It's like, I want it darker. I don't want the cheese as much, blah. But then you're like, well, actually, this film is what it is.
Yes.
It is a film aimed at kids, 1990, and it came after a very successful cartoon and comic book, and that is what it is. So you have to take it with that pinch of salt and enjoy it.
I just want to talk quickly about like the Jim Henson factor. Now, I'm a huge Jim Henson fan, like going back to the Muppets, Sesame Street, obviously things like Dark Crystal.
I don't know why that made me laugh. Sorry.
Shout out to Grover.
Shout out to Grover. Dark Crystal, like Labyrinth, all that kind of stuff. And it was actually one of the last films that Jim Henson actually worked on. And the reason why he was involved with it was partly due to the director Steve Barron, who we mentioned did all those music videos. He also directed an episode of, I don't know if either of you two have seen it, Storyteller.
Which was this I used to watch that on Channel 4.
Yeah, it's like a John Hurt sort of, he was like the storyteller and the dog. Yeah. So he kind of did it as a favour. And whilst he like really appreciated the fact that they sort of advanced animatronics so much in terms of just within the making of this film, as we said, these huge heavy suits, and they did so much with them, he just found the violence like completely excessive and pointless. Like a lot of it doesn't really drive the story on. It's just like you could almost set your watch, just like sit there for 5 minutes. They're still beating the crap out of each other. Yeah, the odd like witty one-liner and stuff, and it doesn't really do that much. Even like when Casey Jones first comes in, he's just like ultra violence to an extent. So yeah, like Jim Henson, as I said, he was sort of happy to be involved with it to an extent, but also really sad. And it's kind of really sad in a way that was like the last film he was involved in. That you would think, oh, it'd be something he'd absolutely love and it'd be a huge thing. And like I said, I completely forgot that the Henson sort of company was involved in it whatsoever.
I didn't have a clue until you kind of see Splinter and you're like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because Splinter looks a lot like some of the creatures from kind of like Dark
Crystal. It's the way he moves.
It's the way he moves, yeah. I think that's it.
The puppetry on the mouth is so much what you would see in like Labyrinth, like the way those characters with beaks would go. There's one bit when Michelangelo's on the phone, and I to this day I still remember the way he says it. So I pre-laugh now when it's coming when Splinter throws the phone book. No, he throws something at Michelangelo's on the phone, and he goes Michelangelo, and it's the way he does it. It's just it's a quick shot, but that puppetry, I'm always like, yep, Jim Henson. That's from that workshop, as it were.
And one other thing, like we were talking about the fact this is an independent film, and they really struggled to pitch it to like any of the studios. And one of the main reasons why, and Etoch will love this, was because Master of the Universe was an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
So following that, this like huge sort of kids' toy, like all the kids love it, so surely it's going to be a smash. And they went really dark with that. I mean, I'm sure we could talk about Master of the Universe for a very long time, but Turtles kind of tried to find a bit more of a middle ground, I would say. There was more humour. It was probably more, sort of, as you said, Smith, aimed at kids. Like, obviously having kind of people in like big green turtle suits probably helps with that.
Yeah.
And it kind of, as Etoch said, it kept to the source material in terms of like the comic books, whilst Masters of the Universe was just a amalgamation of, I don't know, some bloke who was probably far too coked up in the 80s or something like that, because it makes very little sense at all for anyone. But yeah, and as we said, it did very successfully for what it was, made a lot of money, spawned a bunch of sequels, has spawned like reboots and everything else ever since. So
you said like a Michael Bay film.
Well, Michael Bay produced 2 movies, I guess, over during the last 10 years. And I went to see both of them at the cinema because I was like, oh, Ninja Turtles movie, I'll go and see it. And like, I'm not a big fan, I don't think, after what Michael Bay did to those Transformers movies. And don't get me wrong, they made lots of money as well. They made billions for Hasbro, the owners of Transformers. So I'm sure these Ninja Turtles movies made money, but you go and watch them and they're just so cynical. They don't embrace what they are. They're trying too hard to be cool. When you watch this 1990s movie, they're not trying to be cool. Even the Turtles, I would argue that I think the Turtles are just sort of like, they're a bit silly. They're again, it's embracing its source material from the darkness of the independent comics to the cartoon, that finding that balance. Yeah, I just think with the modern ones, also they tried to make them, Michael Bay tried to interfere too much. He wanted to make them aliens from space. The only good thing that came out of the Michael Bay produced movies over the last 10 years, I would say, is Bebop and Rocksteady from the cartoon source screen time, and they were fantastic.
I call them
with modern technology, they did such a good job. And also, and Nigel will be happy to hear this, they introduced Krang.
Krang!
You foolish turtles. Krang turned up, and he was, he wasn't like the cartoon, but he was great. And it was just like the second movie of the most recent ones was very much like them looking at what made the cartoon popular back in the 90s and going with that. But those films didn't find an audience, but there's no arguing that Turtles is still probably almost definitely one of the most successful franchises. They've had cartoon reboots in 2002, 2010. There was one, I was in LA, I think in like 2018, 2019. There was a huge poster on Hollywood Boulevard. Hollywood Boulevard? Yeah, right opposite Netflix at Viacom. And it was just this huge, or Nickelodeon, huge sign for like the rise of the Ninja Turtles series. It's still a brand that makes money and never will stop making money. Simple as that.
It's amazing, isn't it, that this kind of series has just like totally transcended generations through an idea which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. So in the film, we start with the turtles. They're already fully grown turtles, Splinter, and then we have a kind of flashback moment.
Oh, flashbacks are done really well as well. It just goes to dark, doesn't it?
And it doesn't take itself seriously.
No, definitely not.
And yeah, it goes to kind of dark, and then we go back and we see how the origin happened, which I was like, when we started watching the film, I was like, oh man, they haven't shown, like how they became the
and I love the way in the flashbacks as well, the characters, like the turtles, are kind of stood there watching the flashbacks with us, like, oh yeah, and it's almost like breaking down that fourth wall.
And then, one day, I came upon a shattered glass jar and 4 baby turtles.
That was us. Shut up. Oh, no.
The little ones were crawling into a strange glowing ooze from a broken canister nearby. I gathered them up in an old coffee can, and when I awoke the next morning, I received a shock, for they had doubled in size.
Yeah, but it's so interesting how kids especially and generations have kind of always bought into this quite a bizarre idea, really, when you think about it and break it down. But yeah, I'm trying to I think what are those kind of like little, why do people love this?
Why do they love this? And Biker Mice from Mars didn't ever really do anything.
Yeah,
like what is that?
What is it? Is it just really, really good marketing? Or is it more than that?
I always think it comes down to a good idea. It sounds like I was about to do a David Brent quote. A good idea is a good idea forever. But it's true, isn't it? If it's a good idea, and I think if it comes from a true place, I think something like Biker Mars. I actually know someone who worked on Biker Mice from Mars.
Tread carefully.
No, but I think when you look at a show like that, it's trying to piggyback off of Ninja Turtles, and I'm sorry, kids will know that instantly. Biker Mice from Mars or Battletoads
or GoBots.
GoBots, the poor man's Transformers. It's almost like
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Filmation's Ghostbusters. But Ninja Turtles was there's a couple of beautiful documentaries out there. One called Turtle Power, and it's a fantastic documentary that shows like how Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, the famous story is they sketched one of them sketched an idea. I think it was Kevin Eastman illustrated a turtle holding a pair of nunchucks on a napkin in a restaurant for a joke. These were two guys who just wanted to make comic books, but were like, let's just do our own thing. They printed a bunch of copies, put them in comic shops. They sold them. They're like, let's do a second printing. They sold those, do a third printing, fourth printing, fifth printing. They made hundreds of thousands of dollars, to the point where when eventually they sold, I think it was Kevin Eastman sold his shares or ownership to Peter Laird during the 90s. So Kevin Eastman was like, I don't want anything to do with Ninja Turtles anymore. Peter Laird held on to it, did a few things here and there. Turtles wasn't big. Then Nickelodeon were like, here's millions for Ninja Turtles, so he sold the rights to Nickelodeon, and it's a fascinating story. But I think it's because it came from a very pure place. It was so original. It's almost like Spider-Man and Batman.
Yeah.
These things come from an idea. Maybe it's not the most groundbreaking idea in the world, but they worked on something, and it transcended and transcended generations, as you say.
And it's that thing as well, isn't it? Of like, these guys, they're turtles. They live in the sewers. They're almost like no one. They're like no one in society. And I think every kid can kind of like identify with almost that standing up to the bully. We talk like superhero like films in general have
Spider-Man.
that.
That's
like,
the whole thing.
Yeah, Spider-Man or Superman in some ways. But yeah, with Turtles, it is definitely that. And like even like Splinter, it's just like some old rat. But you really root for Splints.
Oh, Jesus.
Yes, Uroku Saki. I know who you are. We met many years ago in the home of my master, Homato Yoshi.
April O'Neil, we discussed the Michael Bay one. Megan Fox, obviously, almost iconically, I suppose, for a modern day generation, although I barely remember that she did it. For this one, there was quite a lot of like 80s/90s it girls, I suppose, or certainly popular actresses at the time. So Jennifer Beals was linked with playing April O'Neil. Marissa Tomei, who's obviously shown up in the Marvel films as Aunt May. Sandra Bullock. Nicole Kidman. Sean Young from kind of Blade Runner.
Sean
Winona
Young.
Ryder. and Brooke Shields as well
But again,
were all
like,
considered for that role.
When you think of Winona Ryder, Brooke Shields, those actresses that at that time were so big, that would have been the name on the poster.
Absolutely.
Like you say, that one of the best things about this movie, and maybe it's got to do with the independency of the movie and the budget, is that they couldn't hire big names. So you're not looking at the screen going, there's Robert De Niro as the Shredder. You know what I mean?
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Well,
You can't do the
No, I'm not
face
going to
on
do
a
an
podcast,
impression.
can you? It doesn't really work.
We're all doing the face. We're all doing
Oh, Al
the face.
Pacino as the Shredder.
yeah, forget about it.
Oh, what are you doing? But yeah, and here's where we do impressions. But yeah, it is amazing when you think of what, like, if you were to do the movie maybe 3 or 4 years later with a bigger budget or like a bigger studio behind it, I don't think it has that. This movie, there's a lot of heart behind this movie, and I think a lot of it's a very genuine movie. It doesn't try and hide behind anything. It is what it is. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think if it had gone to Paramount, it would have ended up as a big, overblown kind of, oh, you know, what is this? I think it's independent is what it kind of goes back to its origins as an independent comic. It's an independent movie. It avoided the success that the cartoon had and kind of it circumnavigated that and went, let's go back to where the roots are. We'll take what we know from the cartoon, what makes it work, the kind of bright personalities, but we'll keep it. And obviously, like you say, Nige, it had a lot to do with them being unable to sell the film. But I think, in a way, that worked to its favour.
It saved it. Yeah, it could have quite easily been another Master of the Universe. Could have quite easily been another Super Mario Brothers, and it wasn't.
Oh,
it stands
Super Mario Bros.
on its own kind of two
That is when you think
green
about
legs.
bloody hell.
Hey! Wait for me! Whoa! God, I love being a turtle!
And what do we think? Come on, guys. Let's.
Well, I'll go. I'm happy to give my rating. For me,
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. I thought the first like half an hour, I was like, wow, this is much better than I remember. Unfortunately, like, the middle just became a bit bloated. Like I said, a lot of fight scenes for the sake of fight scenes. April O'Neil got lost along the way. It just kind of lost itself a little bit. But it was still enjoyable, and I actually love the banging tune at the end credits as well. TURTLE Power. So for me, I would give it a solid 6 out of 10.
Cool. It's a really interesting one because like this is almost like a flashback into young Smith. We've had old
dear.
Smith before,
Without the alcohol.
but yeah, you know, like I remember watching this film as a kid a number of times, and then coming back to it now. I haven't seen this since I was like 11, so it was a bit of a kind of walk down a nostalgic sewer.
That's good.
But you know, not full of shit.
Oh, he's been saving that one all night. Yeah.
I actually just made that up.
That's brilliant, Smith.
One last thing. The sewers were so clean in this
yeah.
film. But yeah, I mean, you know, so I guess there is part of me that it might give this a little bit of a nostalgic point. I think overall, I probably agree with you. I think that first half of the film, like, it really starts really strong. Like, you know, it has a real kind of 90s nostalgic feel. You're quite invested in it. You know, you see the kind of the grime of New York, like robbing them, and then we get the heroes and April O'Neil. And I really, really like April O'Neil as a character, but I totally agree. Like, I feel like she gets lost in this film. And Shredder, I agree with you, Etok. Like, you know, like for me, like this is the guy that, you know, the villain is normally as important, if not more important than the hero. In this film, he's quite weak. He has one fight at the end and gets defeated pretty easily by Rat.
An old rat as well.
By some old rat. Master Splinter.
But
Forgive
yeah,
us.
overall, it's an enjoyable film. I think if you're a kid in the 90s, you'd probably give this an 8. But for me, a 38-year-old bloke in 2021, it's a 6.5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like you guys, I think it's one of those things where nostalgia plays a big part of it. Obviously, I was a huge fan of the Ninja Turtles cartoon and like the franchise in general. Still am. Still got Ninja Turtles DVDs in the other room. Probably got some figures somewhere. But yeah, I think I completely agree. Like Nige, when Nige first said it, it is that moment in the film, and I think it can be clearly defined after that fight in the apartment where the fire is, and they drive off. That's where the film if you were to say, right, explain the plot of that movie, I'd go, okay, all the way up to the apartment, and then I'd forget the rest. It's like, yeah, I know how the film ends, but what happens here? And I think that's the part of the movie where it goes into, like I say, that issue of the comic book where it's, we're going to take our foot off the brake, accelerator now and just chill out for a bit. But yeah, as nostalgic as it is, as much as I loved it when I saw it as a kid, I just want to say one thing about when I watched it as a kid. Because I didn't see it at the cinema, a video was going around the school, and it was like a proper crappy cam job.
Oh no!
So it had like, and it was a cam job of like a version that had been shown with Chinese subtitles and Indian subtitles over the Chinese subtitles. So we're all trying to watch it, and as people gets up at one point, walks across, but you're just so desperate to see this film. You know, it's just like, I want to see this film. And then a year later, I got it on VHS anyway. But I knew enough about it to enjoy it. But yeah, I think on reflection, like I would give this. Nostalgia again plays a big part, but I would go for. I think I'm torn between a 6.5 and a 7. I think I'll go 7. Yeah.
Yeah. And guys, if you have seen this film recently, or even if you haven't, if you want to give it your childhood rating, then write in, email us on offradarpod@gmail.com, tweet us at offradarpodcast, find us on Facebook at offradarpod. Let us know what you thought about this, any of the films we've done so far, and get in touch.
We were awesome!
Bodacious!
Yeah! Bitchin'!
Yeah! Gnarly!
Radical!
Yeah!
Totally turbulent, dude!
Wicked!
Delicious!
Mega!
I have always liked Cowabunga.
Huh?
Cowabunga! Well, guys, yeah, and also I hope you enjoyed that episode. Next time, we will be reviewing our Christmas special, Elf. So be sure to go and watch that. Check it out.
So yeah, was that it? That was an hour.
Yeah, that was long.
Yeah. Normally about half
you
an
might
hour.
may
aren't they?
struggle to.
Oh, this will be a fun edit.